right. Hello there. Can you hear me? Hello, everyone.
Hello.
My camera has decided to be dubious for reasons I don't understand. But
That happens to me too sometimes. Yeah.
so I've got a USB camera, and usually it works, and then suddenly it decides not to. So, and by works I mean not works. I mean works for a moment, and then it cuts out. Excellent. I see people.
Yeah, I think this is all working now.
Alrighty. And Sean, I can hear you as well, so I think that's good. Yeah, and for my camera, I did the amazing unplug and replug it back in. That should have no useful effect, but
Hey, everyone.
there. I guess I can say good afternoon from the U.S. East Coast. Hope things are going well.
If anyone has topics, please add them to the agenda, which I just sent via the chat.
Yeah, I presume that we're going to continue the discussion on 321.
Sure, let's add it.
All right.
Okay. I think let's get started. Again, please add more agenda items if you have anything. Reminder to please remember that by participating, we're abiding by the Linux Foundation Code of Conduct, and to register your attendance on the shared meeting notes. Sean, do you want to go up first?
Yeah, sure. So I was looking through the specs for bundles again the other day, and then noticed that whilst each of the attestations themselves have a signature in the bundle itself doesn't have a signature. And I didn't really get the explanation for not needing one, because it seems to me that if you try to treat the bundle incorrectly, as it may seem, as a kind of bill of materials, not necessarily, in SBOM as the way we all know it. But if you treat that as a bill of materials for the stack that you're delivered, and you just go and check to see that everything that's in the bundle matches its attestation, it seems to me that a malicious actor could hide malicious binaries in the software stack and just remove the attestation for the genuine version that they've added. And I didn't see quite how the monotonic principle protected you from that. So I just wondered whether the group had any thoughts on that, or whether we should be specifying that bundles also have an envelope with a signature. Mark, put your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say the monotonic principle. So first, I guess we didn't define it because we didn't have a concrete use case for it yet. And we're considering each attestation as like an independent thing. And like maybe you could use tough or something. And so like we basically didn't want to kind of go into a space where there's already like solutions, just as a history. I've been thinking that attestations should be like the monotonic principle, meaning like deleting an attestation should never go from something being bad to good. So something like the fact that a piece of software has a vulnerability, that would not be a very good attestation, because if you deleted that, now it goes from bad to good. And that you could phrase it a different way, or alternatively, not store that as attestations, but store it as something else like a database. But it sounds like that it wasn't solving the use case. So I'd like to hear more about like why that doesn't work.
I think it's just, SLSA doesn't really say much about the relationship between artifacts, apart from saying that, potentially listing a flat list of dependencies. But even then, it only lists, the attestation only lists the checksums for those. It doesn't actually point you off to any attestations for. So if you're actually trying to graph walk and discover attestations for everything, one of the things that we're thinking is that what we would do is for the entire chain of custody for a given artifact, from source code through all the build steps to the final artifact that we've been given, we would create a bundle that contained the attestations for everything in that chain. And then we could present that to the user, and the user could have that as a convenient way to check that the entire stack that they've been given for that artifact is in fact verified. But it seems to me like you can't do that, because somebody could say, okay, well, I've got a dependency here But what I want to do, at SLSA 3, we don't actually have to list the dependencies in the attestation. So what I could do is I could just insert a malicious artifact somewhere in the chain, have that contribute code to the final artifact, and just remove its attestation from the bundle. And naive systems that don't double check that the manifest of things that have been shipped and the attestations, well, at SLSA level 3, you'd never know whether any contributed code had come from something malicious, unless you also had attestations for all of those things. And so, yeah, you could potentially just remove an attestation, and a naive system that didn't double check that there was an attestation for every artifact and knew every artifact that was involved in that chain wouldn't know that that attestation had been removed, and wouldn't know that that binary was even present in the chain.
Yeah. This is something that we've been also poking around with Guac and some of the other things. I think it kind of goes beyond SLSA, but I think it's something that SLSA needs to consider, given that I think SLSA is one of the few that's really sort of driving the charge in the right ways. So I do think that's something that needs to be considered. Like, one of the things that we've been doing is we've been sort of relying on whether it's stuff like policy to sort of manage some of that, so that like anything I download must match a certain policy. And so if you deleted something from a bundle, hey, that's great, it no longer matches the policy in some way because it expects a thing. So that's one thing we've been doing. And then separately, we also looking at stuff like, working with the Intoto folks on Intoto layouts to maybe make that a little bit, saying like, hey, I expect this chain, so if I don't see this chain, and once again, this is kind of a little beyond the scope of SLSA, but I think the one thing that I think is really important that SLSA brings to the table is a way to help drive this sort of thing, and help drive like saying, hey, when folks are using SLSA and consuming SLSA in these ways, these are the sorts of things that they should be doing. Because one of the other things that we've done also is we anticipate, like, we expect like the same thing with the monotonic principle, like we expect positive assertions. So it's like, at this time, I checked this thing and found no vulnerabilities. Like that over a lack of an attestation, meaning it's good. So as long as you have like a timestamped attestation that says I didn't find anything at this time, then that's, so that's another thing we've been doing. But I think there's a lot more that needs to get done there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's at SLSA level 3, at least you won't necessarily know the chain of all of the artifacts that actually led to the artifact that you've been given, because you don't have to list, you don't have to be dependencies complete for level 3. So I just wonder how you would do the checks and balances that would say SolarWinds didn't happen to me because I've got these attestations, if you had an incomplete set of attestations.
I guess I'm not 100% confident. My inclination would be that signing the bundle would not be that wouldn't be my first choice for the solution for that. It seems like we would either say, if we want to say that the dependencies is complete, then make an attestation that says that, or like maybe we define SLSA 4, or you have some sort of way of saying either like the provenances list of things is complete, and then the verifier goes and checks, and then it doesn't matter that they're all like the collection of attestations is signed. Or alternatively, you could make a different, or my inclination would be that perhaps you could make a different attestation that says like, this is the chain of things, and sign that. But it's that's the way I would lean toward is like, keep it's kind of a nice property that each attestation itself is signed separately. You could also list the hash of one in another, and you could kind of change it.
I think what you're saying is you're advocating for a separate kind of signed manifest for a software stack rather than having the bundle serve that purpose.
That would be, again, my inclination.
Okay, no, I can take that. But Yeah, that's fine. It just it was just one use case we had for bundle we thought we could use for bundles, but it seems like it's not quite suitable for that use case. Okay. Happy to move on.
Sounds good. Okay, so I talked last time about the build model. I didn't make as much progress as I want. I have a bunch of in-flight stuff that's not really ready to publish yet. But one thing I wanted to quickly share just to get some initial feedback before I spend more time on it is, how do I share the screen? God, every time it's me.
It's in the bottom.
Sharing the screen. Oh, the green
Bottom
button. My eye just skips over the green button because it's like, doesn't look the rest.
You got it. Awesome.
And I unmuted myself. So anyway, this is, I think, just what I've been, the latest iteration of what I've been thinking about. It looks complicated, and any way I could simplify it would be good. But I'm trying to figure out a way that we could use terminology and a diagram that makes it clear to what we're trying to express. So that way people read it and just get it and don't have to like read the nuance of it and read a bunch of documentation, that like you just see some picture and like you could infer all of the things correctly. This is too busy. I could already, looking at this right now, it's too busy. But the thinking was that like there's some external parameters that themselves, some of them refer to artifacts. Like the parameter is like, let's say a Git repo URL. The actual artifact is some external thing, or like, for example. And that gets part of the build definition. I also originally, before I called this, like in this box on the left, like initialization or something. Basically, it's all the things to kick off the build. There'd also be some sort of system inputs that are, I guess, not really part of the, they're things that the build depends on, but not external parameters. For example, like when you run on GitHub Actions, the specific version of the, I'm not sure if that would be a dependency or not. But like the build environment would provide things that is not being explicitly depended on, but is kind of implicitly dependent on. And for reproducibility, you'd need that, but is not an external thing. And so from a threat model, it's not like, it's like a different trust domain. Anyway, this is all very hand wavy and it's work in progress, so if people have thoughts. And so that's what kicks off the build. When the build is running, it can fetch other dependencies. And I'm hoping this kind of diagram would show that like there's top level things and then other dependencies kind of recursive, there's like some tree of dependencies. The environment also can talk to the build platform. This is something that's come up before in terms of the hermetic requirement of like, there's going to be some internal traffic, but it's like maybe not part of the main definition of the build and like user visible. And then it outputs some artifacts. So I guess I'll stop there and wanted to see if this type of thing either resonated or didn't, and it's like confusing or positive or negative feedback.
Yeah, I think it is rather complicated. I mean, I suspect a lot of people when they first see this thing say, "Where's the source?" Oh, sorry. I see Michael's hand up. Sorry, Michael.
Oh no, you were already talking before I put my hand up. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I specifically didn't put source because that itself has been confusion of like what is source and what's not. And so I thought, well, if we don't special case it, like why do we need to special case it? And it's really just, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, so a couple of things that have come up and some folks have been pinging me about just sort of more generally, and is around this sort of problem of, and this kind of goes beyond, once again, it goes beyond SLSA, and I do think that SLSA kind of has a way of helping drive the change and lead the charge. One of the things that was brought up was like the eventual need for something like an ontology to say like, this is what an input is to a build or whatever, and then we can just say, and then this is how SLSA translates that into its own internal data model. That's one thing, but the other thing I think that is being brought up, and just something that we need to be aware of, and we need to probably make sure that we stay in sync with other folks, is like, for example, the SBOM folks are starting to build out, whether it's build info, right, within SPDX, or I think CycloneDX is calling it formulation or something like that. But they're both kind of coming at it in a similar way of saying, hey, we take in some sort of inputs that come from the build platform, some sort of inputs that come from the build itself, and so on and so forth, and then we build a thing. And that's kind of where they're coming at it from. And I think one thing that I just want to make sure of is like, we don't necessarily need to be in lockstep with everything that other folks are doing, but it would be nice to make sure that we're not completely doing something, completely different. And especially since I think we could lead the charge on this, is like, we can say, hey, this is how we're doing it. If other folks who are debating this want to, look at what we're doing, here's where it is.
Actually, I would go further. I mean, it might actually save time by grabbing some of the terminology that they're using. It'd be nice to have the same word mean the same thing for once.
Agreed. Yeah, I was just about to say, yeah, I agree with what Josh just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, yes, for once, I'm fully admitting that I may be dreaming. But I think the SPDX folks have worked on this for some time, haven't they?
Yeah, and in
So-
fact, I've been attending the build meetings.
Okay.
It's actually a little bit circular because they've been using the SLSA definition as opposed to the other way around.
No, that's a good thing. It's a good thing.
I think, and I don't know enough about CycloneDX. I really need to connect with them on the formulation piece. I think the main problem I've seen so far is it's not specific enough. That for SBOM, it is like, it does not cover all, it is not as strong and strict of a build model because they're not worried about the integrity and tampering piece. And so like they're mostly worried about vulnerability management. And so, or like hand analysis or something where it's just human readable and a human can understand it. And so that like lack of rigor or precision just hasn't been a problem so far, I think. And so that's where I've been kind of struggling a little bit. But yeah, I agree that ideally we'd align between CycloneDX and SPDX and SLSA and just have like the same model, ideally the same terms.
Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe you can use the higher level terms and then break it out for the refinement. So like, your diagram could even have a looser, but then say, hey, like, these artifacts divide into several things, or like you might not need to expressly note the parameters. You can just say that top level artifacts come in, and some of them are defined by parameters, and some of them are discovered during the build process. I know that may be a little too that may oversimplify things.
Yeah, here I was trying to use the same fields as in the provenance, and which is undergoing like a lot of iteration too. But like, yeah. So Arno?
Yeah, so it may just be because I am still too new here to know all of what's behind those. But actually, I kind of like your diagram, and I had no problem interpreting the top part. The green part is less clear to me, especially the relationship between system inputs and build platform and the environment. There seems to be too many arrows there. So maybe, again, I'm just lacking a clear understanding of what's behind those boxes exactly, but the system inputs is especially the part that's a bit mysterious to me.
I agree. I agree completely. And I don't know, yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to simplify it. So I could explain what my thinking was, and maybe that can spur you to like come up with, oh, you
Yes,
could simplify
please.
it this way.
Mhm.
That's why I originally had like those gray boxes, but I think just the gray boxes that kind of are in these arrows just added too much noise.
I agree.
That these two things are effectively parameters to kick off the build. Like it is the small, like the minimal set of information you need to kick off the build. The parameters coming from an external source and system inputs. And like this is what we were kind of worried about in the threat model. Like this is what external attackers can control. These are things that only like an insider within the build platform can control. Or like, and so they would be needed, say, for reproducibility, but would not be like there's not as concerning because they're not as big of a risk there. Again, this is all the thinking, not necessarily this is correct. This build versus environment, I did that because that was in our current diagram. Where is it here? Let me present this tab. That was here. Maybe we just split it. And we also talk about like an ephemeral environment that like you create something. If that's too confusing, we could just split it off and just, delete that and make one big thing like that.
No,
Don't do it yet. Don't do it yet.
Don't do it.
Yeah,
Environment
I'm
itself doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
I think I can pretty much grasp what this is. But so let me react to what you just explained. Shouldn't we have like simply external parameters and internal parameters or system parameters then? Let me clarify a bit.
You mean like terminology wise, like why the difference?
The way you explained it, you said, okay, we have external parameters and then we have essentially parameters that are from the system. Oh yeah, that's interesting.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
And then like,
oh my goodness.
I like that better. That's much more.
That and like delete.
Yeah, well, yeah. I had a question. Do we need the build? I mean, I can see it if you might need to talk about how the environment interacts with the outside, but if you don't, wow. Actually, you know what? You were worried about complexity earlier. This doesn't look complex to me.
No, I agree.
This looks pretty straightforward.
that actually addresses my confusion. So, I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah,
I mean, it'll be the good reference point, but
right. Do we need to talk about connections between the environment and the build platform? If so, I think you need to bring it back. But if you don't, then don't.
Yeah, I think maybe probably keep this because like this is in practice in most systems would be some sort of orchestrator. Again, using GitHub Actions as like our default build system.
Yeah.
This would be like effectively this box here is the VM where it runs, and this would be the communication, like the control plane.
If you want to play games on simplifying how it looks, you can turn the two-way arrows into a single double arrow, arrow on each end. Yeah. I know there's a name for it. I can't remember what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't change what you're showing, so.
But so wait, so now you have removed the link between the build platform and trusted parameters.
I'm actually okay with that because I think that's actually more accurate.
I'm against it. Huh? I just want to make sure we agree that this is the right thing to do. I like it too.
I was trying to visualize it because like ideally there'd be, and part of this came up because Sean previously had talked about like trust domains or trust boundaries. And I was trying to like visualize that, like there's some things coming from the outside and some things coming from internal. And I didn't like just having the word trusted or not. I don't love it. That's what I was trying to like visualize it, but I couldn't figure out how to like visualize like a boundary because like there's kind of like this is a VM here and this is the build platform. I don't know, but maybe this is the best result.
But I think you're basically right though. Let me pitch for what you wrote. You are trusting the environment parameters more or less, certainly more than the external parameters. Whereas I mean, in some sense, you are trusting the external parameters because you think that that's going to help you build something, but you are trusting them a lot less. All right, environmental parameters, fair.
Maybe, yeah. The other thing
Okay.
I was thinking was like there's kind of a circular definition of what does trusted mean, and I would, yeah, and the environmental would maybe go with environment.
Yeah, yeah, that one certainly that eliminates the trust concern.
Um, yeah, okay. All right, I don't want to take too much time. This was super helpful. Thanks for the feedback. I will continue iterating on this in the whatever pull request it is. I can't find it right this second. On the provenance 1.0, the draft pull request. So if you have other thoughts, I'll try to incorporate this idea and when redesigning it to simplify it. So thanks a lot. David, I think you're next on 321.
Yeah, so this is not really. I'm not sure I have a strong position really, other than the obvious one of we'll have to resolve this, which I don't think is really in doubt. But I think this is going to be a little complicated. I don't. But how strong is your guarantee required for isolated and ephemeral environments? It's also 3, and I guess the main thing I was worried about, and I reread pull request the 321, and it looks like it wasn't as concerning as was, but to me it needs to be possible to automate, and I don't think that's really in contention. At first, I was afraid that we were going to go down that path. So I see there's a pull request proposed, but this needs resolution, and I think this seems complicated the more I think about it. And yet, I think this is going to have to be resolved somehow here.
Yeah, I'd definitely be interested in other folks' thoughts. I think the best I was thinking that we could do would be for the requirements that the build system, like by default, doesn't listen to external influence. And if the user's script or configuration ends up doing that, like there could be clear instruction not to do that, but I think there's no way that we could really guarantee that unless we had like a higher SLSA level.
Yeah, and good luck on some of these systems. I mean, there's so many systems where step 1 is curl bar sh. So, and if you don't do that, you have no tools. So, it's challenging. I'm not encouraging this, by the way, just observing reality.
Yeah. So I do think like there probably is a lot of prior art on this that I think we can kind of draw from, whether it's how Basil does, or Basil does this, and similar sort of build systems, as well as like Nix, how they sort of do isolated, ephemeral, sandboxed, hermetic, etc. I think there's a lot of like interesting literature out there on kind of like that hierarchy of like, this is isolated but not ephemeral, this is ephemeral but not isolated, this is a hermetic but not the other, not reproducible. I think that there's a lot of stuff that we can draw from.
In terms of the pull request, Aaron's pull request, any thoughts on that? Has anyone else reviewed it? The basic idea is to merge isolated and ephemeral because they're really describing the same thing, which is that like there's one build can't influence another build.
Yeah,
I think they're talking about two different concepts, but I'm not sure the distinction matters here. In that, one's kind of space, dimensions in space, and the other one is kind of dimension in time. But I suspect for the intent here, we're probably talking about the same sort of thing, but maybe neither word is fit for purpose in that case.
yeah, and I do worry that the word isolated is going to be confused with the word hermetic. Maybe I'm the only one worrying about that.
Yeah, no, that's a concern for me too. I think we need to make a very technical distinction between what those two things are. If we're going to say isolated at level 3 and hermetic at level 4, there needs to be a distinction between them.
Right.
One thing I've been thinking about would be to kind of go a step further than this pull request. And let me see if I could share my draft.
By the way, just if this is kind of a quick while you look, when you say should not, you mean the usual IETF definition, right? Shouldn't do it, but you can if there's a decent reason for it. Hopefully you document the reason.
Yeah, David, that was my intention, based on the conversation and the issue, is more a recommendation rather than a can't.
Right. Okay. All right. Which is what should not means for IETF or just normal English. Yeah. But obviously, if you're saying should not, that means it's possible you could.
So one thing I try to zoom in on that. Ignore all the other text. It's all but like I was thinking of simplifying the level structure. So instead of having like a bunch of check boxes, basically, I think if we think about the build levels, it boils down to two things. One is guarantees about the provenance. Level 1, just that it exists at all. Level 2, that we have authentication in some sort of, I'm not sure that word is perfect there. And 3, that it's like non-forgeable. And we could define what those mean. And then similarly, the strength of isolation between builds. Level 1, there's no guarantee at all. Level 2, merely that there's just, it's hosted on some service. We have to figure out how that plays into reproducible builds, but that's separate. And then 3, that this would be the isolated and ephemeral environment. Fully isolated is probably not the right word either, but basically I think maybe we could think of the build levels in those strategies on those. They're not really orthogonal axes, but they're related. But in that, I don't know, any thoughts on that?
I guess, what are we leaving for L4? I mean, it build L3 says, hey, you can't forge it. It's fully isolated, and it sounds like you're all done. And we know that's not actually true.
I think it would be, that's a good question. Maybe something around dependencies, like it's non-forgeable and dependencies complete or something like that. I don't know if there's anything about isolation strength as well. Like maybe again, I don't like these labels, just to be clear.
Okay.
I think I need better labels, but yeah, and I think this is extending the idea of what Aaron did. Anyway.
Okay.
I think Marcelo was first.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to actually, overall, I think the structure will make it easier for people to understand the different levels, what you're trying to accomplish. But I also like second or third. The fact that hosted and fully isolated, especially, I don't know what that means, just looking at those. And especially, yeah, I think the distinction between fully isolated and then hermetic is really unclear. If that's what we're trying to sort of distinguish between L3 and L4. I also don't exactly know what we mean by authenticated versus non-forgeable. But yeah, I think I'm just like echoing the terminology questions.
I was just gonna say, not as much detail, but more like a marketing kind of attack of this. I like that it's simplified, right? Because it's a lot easier to consume. However, from a first look at it, all of the checkboxes made it look really cool. so, so it's like, whoa, like I have all these checkboxes I can go and try to, attack, and then I'll become salsa level X. So it's almost like I'm on the fence about the way it's displayed. That's all.
Yeah, so I like the yeah, I agree with Aaron. I like the kind of checkboxes, that kind of approach, and I think for what that leaves for L4 is, your provenance guarantees are complete as well at L4, and your isolation strength then is when we fall down on hermetic as that. But I think we do need some strong, complete definitions of what we mean by isolated and hermetic and what the difference between them is. And yeah, I get, I think the difference potentially between authenticated and non-forgeable is that authenticated is you can tell that the provenance came from where it came from. And non-forgeable is you can also tell that the content hasn't been tampered with. Whether there's a technical distinction in there depending on the implementation or not, I don't know, but you could look at it that way.
I think I have to disagree a bit with Aaron and Sean. I get the appeal of the checkbox visual, but I also think that not making, I worry that it's made it look too easy, like you can just check a few boxes and you've achieved things, whereas it actually the requirements actually require you to think at a much deeper level than a lot of first-time readers realize, because of things like the isolated and hermetic requirements that the terminology is so confusing around. So I do like the direction of the visual you've come up with, Mark, even if we have to do a round of back and forth on the specific terms. I also, like last week and this week, that we have been starting, it feels like we've been starting to trend towards maybe hermetic is an L3 requirement and not an L4 requirement. And I just wanted to raise that like as a point of discussion, maybe. So I think in all the confusion around the term isolated versus hermetic and things, that there have been, yeah, maybe the question we should address explicitly, like are we as a group thinking of pulling the hermetic requirement into L3? And I would say no, but I'm curious what the consensus is.
Yeah, I thought there was a general consensus on no, but that doesn't mean I'm correct.
Yeah, I also was not thinking that. And so if there's any, that was not at all my intention. So if anything is trending that direction, then let's call that out. I was not trying to actually change any of the requirements, but just change how we lay them out.
On a purely practical level, I think there are steps that need to be taken to get to a fully hermetic build that are more difficult to get to than a slightly more watered down definition of isolated. There are some processes that still, for better or worse, require some sort of network access to do things like getting a hold of timestamps and things like that. And I think, you know, eliminating those is a fantastic goal, but it's not entirely practical right now.
So the point has been made several times now that it becomes unclear what L4 is going to be. And I understand why you don't want to go into defining precisely what L4 is going to be, but maybe it's still useful to hint as to what this is expected to be about.
So could it be hardware isolation? I'm thinking trusted execution, enclaves, that sort of thing for L4, or should we not be going there yet?
So we still have in the 1.0 draft, like what the requirements at L4 were as an indication of this is where we assume higher levels will go, or where we want our higher levels to go, but we've kind of hidden it, or Mark's hidden it behind some toggleables. So it is still the idea of, you know, hermetic, and that we shouldn't be pulling things from the network during the build. And yeah, there we go. Dependencies complete. So Arno, does that address your?
Yeah, I think
position?
that works. That I just, you know, I was trying to react to the fact that the point was made several times, and maybe it would still be useful to have it in the table, even if it's not defined, just to hint that there is this thing there.
Yeah.
But
You know what? I think Arno has a point. Even if it's not one of the formal things, knowing that, no, we're not asking you to be hermetic for L3 might be clarifying.
yeah, I mean, in a way, that's what I was trying
Oh,
to
I see.
get to, is that, you know, it shows there's more you could expect to be done. So L3 is not meant to capture everything, the absolute best.
Almost it makes the other terms clearer, because we're explicitly saying these aren't things that we expect you to do.
Exactly.
Right.
That's a
We
good way
expect
to
you
put
to do
it.
A and not necessarily B. I mean, if you are hermetic, that's great. It's not that it's a problem. It's just not required.
Yeah, I think let's consider that. My only worry is that if we call something level 4 there, then it's just going to be set in stone and it'll be really hard to change. And so even if we say draft and don't rely on this, people are going to rely on it anyway.
Well, here's a weird idea, Mark. Can we agree on a definition of hermetic? I think we can. And then we can define the other term as, you know, in the definition, and say, hey, it has to do this. Note that it is not necessarily hermetic. See hermetic. Include a definition. Now it's not in the table, but at least we've stuck a flag in the word for the word hermetic.
David?
Yeah, the only just I'm sorry, I'm trying to just listen for luck. I'm kind of new to the group and seeing where things are going, but just in my own past experience dealing with audited and auditable environments, is I think there might be a concern out there, people saying, well, 3 may not be the level I need to be at for the industry. I need to be at 4. And there's a confusion that when I've heard a couple people say that 3 is not a bad thing. But externally, I think the view is, if I'm not a 4, I'm not going to be SLSA. Should we even pursue it or not? It's like an all or nothing viewpoint. Like if you're looking at, if you're PCI compliant, you're either compliant or not. And I think that's just one concern I have. I just wanted to raise it and see what people thought.
So I may have a solution, or at least I have a suggestion, which may address the problem. Maybe we just need to list what's not required for L3. So we don't have to call it L4 or anything like this. We just list the kind of things that are not required for L3.
Yeah. To David's point, though, I think there's also, one of the stances I know we took fairly early on was to try and not get into the, hey, when somebody decides to require SLSA conformance as a requirement for some sort of compliance reason. We still want to allow whatever that might be, like whatever, you know, if folks are going to say, hey, we require SLSA 3 or SLSA 4 for, you know, up and down the chain, that's fine. There's going to be some standards body or whatever that might say that that's the requirement. But this group is trying not to take like a hard stance on, you know, on that, given that different use cases and different, you know, organizations are going to have different requirements. And, you know, I'm not going to be SLSA 4 for my personal blog, but if I'm working on, you know, transaction software for a bank, I might want to be SLSA 4.
But so following up on my idea, maybe you call it like beyond L3. So you don't call it L4, and that allows you to list the kind of things. Because if you look at the table, when you have L1, L2, you naturally infer, okay, the things that are listed in L2 are not expected for L1. And we could carry that one step further for L3 by having a column that's beyond L3. That would kind of hint at was not a required explicitly for L3.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, I want to make sure we only have 10 minutes. I don't know if that's enough time for Josh, but I think if we're okay with that, let's have time for that. I will try to incorporate this feedback, and I'll send out 2 pull requests whenever I clean them up. Right now they're a big mess. On the for the provenance, well, I'll update the existing pull request for the provenance diagram, and then this one on like the restructuring of the table, so we could try to figure out what makes sense there. Also check the meeting notes to make sure we captured everything. Josh?
Yes, so I kind of wanted to, I know we discussed it a little bit ago in a larger SLSA meeting, but it's kind of been, and I've been fairly busy for the past couple of weeks. So I haven't really been able to come and attend and bring it up again, but I wanted to discuss a little bit more on the conformance program. As I know, as we're building our requirements, we will want a way for organizations, obviously, to assess that they follow the requirements in a fairly transparent and good way for us to not kind of dilute the brand as time goes on. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the scope. I know it was discussed. That was kind of the biggest point of discussion around it when it first came up is what exactly do we want to prove conforms to SLSA? And so kind of my first thought and something I've been mulling over is kind of in the spirit of developing and kind of a minimal viable product for this to see what works, would be to initially target build systems for a set of, features that they can provide so that users will be able to know if they go and select a build system that they're able to meet their SLSA goals for their software as they build their software. If they want to hit SLSA level 4, well, they got to select a build system that provides SLSA level 4 functionality or can attest to that accurately. So I was hoping that we could kind of discuss that scope item here in this meeting and kind of figure out if we're aligned on what we want the scope to be so that we can kind of identify the subset of requirements that apply in particular to build systems, and so that we can then define exactly what a questionnaire might look like and start refining those items so we can get started testing. And then obviously we'll have to work on, well, what does branding look like? What does legal work look like? But I think obviously primary goal, first step is figuring out scope. So kind of want to open up to the floor if anyone has any issues with kind of targeting a subset of use cases first and then moving on from there. No, there's a hand up, Tracy.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point to start with. And I'm kind of looking at some of the examples of what people are claiming are SLSA compliant. And then the one I do want to make sure we cover is things like the Kubernetes release process. Those folks are working through kind of SLSA compliance, and I shared a link to the spreadsheet. They're checking things off, but I think definitely having a way for open source projects and their build/release process to be like deemed SLSA compliant will be a key one.
Yeah, I think starting with build system sounds good to me. I think that's, to me, that's like the bulk of what I was thinking. Maybe expand in the future, but like not just start with build system, but I feel like that is, at least for the first version, limiting the scope to that is probably good in my mind. And then if we, I feel like we should develop that in conjunction with the requirements, where we say like, this is how you assess that, and like link to the guidelines of like, well, here's how you do it in the assessment and like the properties that you check. So that way you could map directly from like the, I'll use the term hosted, the current crappy term that we just discussed in previous section. And you could link that to like, well, here in the assessment, like here's the properties that you check, and this is what we're expecting. This is what we're not expecting at this level. Like kind of guidelines. I think that'd be good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I like that. Having a you know, each kind of question in the questionnaire would kind of maybe map to one or more different of the requirements, and that we could, you know, and then they could say, yes, we checked that property of our build system and we think it complies with this, or here's why we think it, you know, it doesn't maybe match the letter of the law, but here's why we think it does, and here's our explanation, etc. Obviously, that's, you know, these are kind of the first steps to figure that out, but then there's going to be a lot more before we have to get that. Yeah, I don't know who is next, Luke or Marcella.
I think it was Luke.
Okay. No? Luke?
Sure.
I was just talking away on mute. Sorry. Yes, it's probably quite a rudimentary question just to get me up to speed. So is this something that a community would self-certify? They would sort of take themselves through the process, or would there be an arbiter? Is it like a badging program?
Yeah, so the initial idea is that we have kind of two levels. One is a self-certification level, and the other one is a third-party assessed level. But obviously, you know, taking one thing at a time, figuring out who is able to assess projects to SLSA. That's a whole nother discussion that we'll have to figure out, like which audit companies are approved to do audits, and et cetera, right? So the first step we're thinking is a self-assessment that will be clearly marked as this is self-certified, and they get to use the self-certified badge. So they don't get the, this has been third-party audited, et cetera, badge, or something like that. But kind of first step would be self-certification anyway, kind of in line with what some other organizations do, like what is the program? Yeah, kind of similar to that world. But you can look more at the doc attached to the GitHub issue, and it kind of goes over the idea of the two levels and kind of how that would work, and what you would get for self-certifying versus what you would get for going full third-party audit. But kind of right now, we're just thinking about targeting that first self-certification level.
Gotcha. Thank you. I'll go and read the doc as well.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah. I wanted to, well, in any case, a discussion that Chris and I have been having has been around evidence for self-certification or not. And so I just kind of wanted to bring it back to that aspect as well, that, you know, whether or not evidence is required or recommended or whatever else you want to sort of specify should be part of the conformance questions as well, I think. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I realize we're almost at that time. If two real quick points. One, hopefully it's obvious, but just to foot stomp, because the levels, it doesn't matter if it's self-cert or third party, the requirements are the same. All you're asking is how much evidence and verification of these there are. And Trace Miranda noted, public sharing how they believe the requirements. I think that does at least partially help some of the known challenges of self-cert. I would expect, even if you were going to go to third party, that you would want to self-cert first. Why go through the pain and cost of a third party when you know you're not going to make it? So,
Exactly.
check first.
Yeah, that makes
That's it.
total sense. Yeah, I think the idea is that, if you do a self-cert, it would be like a lot of these other programs, they require an upload of your questionnaire document, like that you filled out for your company, to be applied to a public registry of some sort. So the idea could be like, every, different build systems, if they want customers to trust them, they go, we have this badge, and as part of us being able to legally show you this badge, we also have a questionnaire available on our project site or whatever. But that's a discussion for lawyers to figure out. And that is not us.
And I'm lead of the best practices badge, and although it's mostly self-cert, we actually do detect cases and we reject answers we can determine are false. So if you make a claim and we can tell it's false, it actually doesn't matter. We will reject and reject the claim. So it's, you can sometimes, detect certain configurations that either will or won't meet certain criteria.
Yeah, I think that's kind of going to be difficult with the build system side. I don't know how we could. I can't think of, if someone else can think of a way to automatically detect stuff like that. But if
I think you can detect certain answers. I think you can detect certain answers, but you're right. In general, I think this is hard.
Yeah, if someone in the community can come and show proof that someone's lying, I think we should reserve the right to say, oh, someone lied to us about their certification. We're getting rid of it, and maybe we should call legal up and see what they want to do about that.
I have good news. Self-cert, there are liars. The bad news, there are liars. The good news is that there aren't many, thankfully. At least, it depends on the value of it. So you can take that for what you will.
We're out of time. Thank you, everyone. This, I think, was very productive. And we'll talk to you next time. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Thank you.